173 touchdowns, 220 interceptions, a completion percentage barely above 50%, and a bust in Canton, Ohio, with his name engraved in bronze for all eternity. How? Because he guaranteed a victory in one game 56 years ago, and the media loved him. That is not a Hall of Fame career. That is a marketing campaign that worked so well it fooled an entire generation of voters. And he is not alone. There are players in the Pro Football Hall of Fame right now who have no business being there. Not because they were bad, but because the standard that got them in would never, ever get a modern player through the door. Some of them were carried by the greatest teams ever assembled. Some of them played so long that voters confused longevity with dominance. One of them is in the Hall of Fame as a player when everyone agrees he should be in as a coach. And one of them had a career completion percentage so low that if a quarterback posted those numbers today, he would be out of the league in 2 seasons. This is not about disrespecting legends. This is about honesty. Because if we are going to call it the Hall of Fame, then the standard has to mean something. And for these 10 players, the standard was bent, lowered, or completely ignored. If you want football content that actually challenges the narratives instead of repeating them, subscribe right now. This is going to make some people very angry. Let's go.
Starting at number 10, with a name that will immediately make Steelers fans furious. Jerome Bettis, the Bus. One of the most beloved players in Pittsburgh history. 13 seasons, 13,662 career rushing yards, 6th all-time when he retired, a Super Bowl ring, a bust in Canton, and a career yards per carry average of 3.9. 3.9. Let me put that in context. Corey Dillon had a 4.3 yards per carry average, not in the Hall of Fame. Jamal Lewis had a 4.2 average, not in the Hall of Fame. Fred Taylor had a 4.6 average, not in the Hall of Fame. But Jerome Bettis at 3.9 is enshrined forever. Why? Because he played forever and accumulated volume stats on one of the most famous franchises in football. Bettis had 1 first-team All-Pro selection in his entire career. 1. That was in 1996 with the Steelers. He never led the league in rushing yards. He never led the league in rushing touchdowns. He was a very good running back who stayed healthy and played a long time. And that should not be enough. The Hall of Fame is supposed to be for the best players in history. Not the most durable, not the most popular, the best. And Jerome Bettis was never the best running back in the league in any single season of his career. He is in the Hall of Fame because people loved him, not because he dominated.
And that is exactly the problem with the voting process that let him in. Number 9, John Henry Johnson. And if you just said "who" out loud, you proved my point. Johnson played 13 seasons from 1954 to 1966 with the 49ers, Lions, Steelers, and Oilers. He rushed for 6,803 yards and 48 touchdowns. He caught 186 passes for 1,478 yards. And he was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1987, 21 years after he retired. 21. That is not a player the football world immediately recognized as a Hall of Famer. That is a player who was inducted by a senior committee decades later, when almost nobody who played against him was still alive to argue. Johnson was a good fullback, a tough, physical runner who played in an era where fullbacks were workhorses. But his stats are modest even for that era. His induction is a perfect example of what happens when voters feel obligated to honor an era rather than honor individual dominance. John Henry Johnson is in the Hall of Fame because voters wanted to make sure the 1950s had representation, not because his career demanded it. And that is a sympathy induction, dressed up as an honor.
Number 8, Jim Langer, the center for the 1972 undefeated Miami Dolphins. And that sentence is his entire Hall of Fame case. Langer played 10 seasons from 1970 to 1979, almost entirely with the Dolphins. He was selected to 1 Pro Bowl. 1 in his entire career. He was never considered the best center in football during his playing days. He was a solid, reliable lineman on one of the most famous teams in NFL history, and he was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1987 by the Senior Committee, 15 years after the perfect season, because voters wanted to make sure the Dolphins team had representation beyond the skill position players. Ask any football fan under the age of 50 who Jim Langer is. Most of them will have no idea. Ask fans over 50, and many of them will struggle. That is not name recognition worthy of Canton. That is a player who got in because he was on the right team at the right time, and because voters felt obligated to honor that team. 1 Pro Bowl, modest stats, a Senior Committee induction decades later. Jim Langer is the textbook definition of a Hall of Famer who would never get in if he played today.
Number 7. And this one is different because everyone agrees Dick LeBeau belongs in the Hall of Fame, just not as a player. LeBeau played 14 seasons as a cornerback with the Detroit Lions from 1959 to 1972. He intercepted 62 passes, which was third all-time when he retired. He was a 3-time Pro Bowler. Solid career. Not spectacular, not dominant. Solid. And in 2010, LeBeau was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame as a player. The problem is that Dick LeBeau's true legacy is as a coach. He is the architect of the zone blitz. He is one of the greatest defensive coordinators in NFL history. He coached the Pittsburgh Steelers defenses that terrorized the league in the 2000s. He is a coaching legend whose schemes are still being used today. But he was inducted as a player. And as a player, his resume is unremarkable. Good, but unremarkable. LeBeau should be in the Hall of Fame, 100%. But he should be in as a contributor or coach, not as a player. This is a case where the Hall of Fame got the person right, but the category completely wrong. And that matters, because it sets a precedent that playing credentials can be inflated by post-playing achievements. And that is not how the Hall of Fame is supposed to work.
Number 6. Don Maynard, a wide receiver who played 15 seasons from 1958 to 1973, primarily with the New York Jets. Maynard caught 633 passes for 11,834 yards and 88 touchdowns. Those are good numbers. Not great, good. And Maynard was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1987, 24 years after the Jets won Super Bowl III. 24. That is not a player whose greatness was immediately recognized. That is a player who was inducted by a senior committee because voters wanted to honor the AFL era and Joe Namath's supporting cast. Maynard was Namath's favorite target. He benefited enormously from playing alongside the most hyped quarterback in AFL history, but Maynard himself was not dominant. He was never considered the best receiver in football. He was never a household name. And when you ask modern football fans to name Hall of Fame wide receivers, Don Maynard is almost never mentioned. That is not because fans are uneducated. That is because his induction was more about honoring an era than honoring an individual. Don Maynard is in the Hall of Fame because the Jets won Super Bowl III, and voters felt obligated to put more than just Namath in Canton. That is not a Hall of Fame standard. That is a participation trophy for being on a famous team.
We are entering the top 5 now. And if you think those first 5 were controversial, you have not seen anything yet. The next 5 players include a kicker with a 66% field goal rate, a quarterback who never threw for more than 2,500 yards in a season, a center with 1 Pro Bowl, a quarterback who threw more interceptions than touchdowns for his entire career, and at number 1, the most overrated Hall of Famer in NFL history, a man whose entire legacy is built on 1 game, 1 guarantee, and a media machine that turned a below-average quarterback into a cultural icon. Subscribe if you are not already. This is where it gets brutal.
Number 5. George Blanda. And this is the most confusing induction in Hall of Fame history. Blanda played 26 seasons. 26! From 1949 to 1975. He was a quarterback and a kicker.
and he was never truly elite at either position. As a quarterback, Blanda threw 236 touchdowns and 277 interceptions. More interceptions than touchdowns. For his entire career, his passer rating was 52.5. If a quarterback posted those numbers today, he would be out of the league in 2 years. As a kicker, Blanda made 335 of 498 field goal attempts. That is a 67% success rate. Jan Stenerud, who is also on this list, had a better percentage, and Stenerud is considered one of the worst Hall of Fame inductees ever. So what is Blanda's case? Longevity. That is it. He played 26 seasons. He was a novelty, a quarterback who also kicked, a player who hung around long enough to accumulate stats that look impressive on paper, but collapse under any scrutiny. George Blanda is in the Hall of Fame because voters were impressed by the fact that he played for over 2 decades, not because he was ever the best player at his position, not because he dominated, because he lasted. That is not a Hall of Fame standard. That is a participation award for showing up for a really long time.
Number 4. Bob Griese, the quarterback of the only undefeated team in NFL history, the 1972 Miami Dolphins. 17-0. Perfect. And Bob Griese's career is the biggest example of being carried by a supporting cast in Hall of Fame history. Griese played 14 seasons from 1967 to 1980. He threw 192 touchdowns and 172 interceptions. His career passer rating was 77.1. He never threw for more than 2,500 yards in a single season, not once. The Dolphins had one of the greatest defenses in NFL history. They had Larry Csonka, Mercury Morris, and Jim Kick in the backfield. 3 Hall of Fame caliber running backs on the same team. The Dolphins ran the ball more than almost any team in history. And Griese managed the game. He handed off. He threw short passes. He did not turn the ball over. And when the Dolphins went 17-0 in 1972, Griese was injured for part of the season. And backup Earl Mole played so well that there was legitimate debate about who should start in the playoffs. Bob Griese is in the Hall of Fame because he was the quarterback of the perfect season, not because he was a great quarterback. The defense and the running game won that championship. Griese just happened to be the guy holding the clipboard, and that got him into Canton.
Number 3. Jan Stenerud, the first pure place kicker inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and one of the worst statistical inductees in Canton history. Stenerud played 19 seasons from 1967 to 1985 with the Chiefs, Packers, and Vikings. He made 373 of 558 field goal attempts. That is a 66.8% success rate. 66%. Any average NFL kicker today has a success rate in the mid to high 80s. Stenerud's career highlight, according to the Hall of Fame website, is that he made 17 field goals of 50 yards or longer in his entire career. 17. In 19 seasons. Modern kickers make that many in 3 or 4 years. Justin Tucker has made 60-plus field goals from 50 yards or longer, and he is still playing. Stenerud got into the Hall of Fame for one reason. He was the first pure kicker, the first soccer-style kicker to become a star. And voters decided that being first was enough to ignore the fact that his statistics are thoroughly mediocre. Jan Stenerud is in the Hall of Fame because he was a historical footnote, not because he was great. And the fact that kickers are even in the Hall of Fame is a debate that will never end. But if they are going to be in, the standard should be dominance, not novelty. Number 2. Lynn Swann, 4 Super Bowl rings, highlight reel catches, and a Hall of Fame induction that has been debated since the day it happened. Swann played 9 seasons from 1974 to 1982, all with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He caught 336 passes for 5,462 yards and 51 touchdowns. He currently ranks 237th on the all-time receiving yards list. 237th. Swann never led the league in receptions, never led the league in yards, never led the league in touchdowns.
He never finished in the top 5 in any major receiving category in any season of his career. His Hall of Fame case is built entirely on 4 Super Bowl rings and a handful of iconic catches, most notably his acrobatic grab in Super Bowl X that is replayed every year. But here is the problem. Swann's teammate, John Stallworth, had better stats, more yards, more touchdowns, more consistency. And Stallworth barely got into the Hall of Fame. He had to wait years. Swann got in on the first ballot. Why? Because Swann's catches were prettier. Because he was more famous. Because the media loved him.
Lynn Swann is in the Hall of Fame because he played on the greatest dynasty of the 70s and made a few catches that looked amazing on television, not because his career numbers justify Canton. If Lynn Swann played today with those exact stats, he would not even be in the conversation, and that tells you everything. Number 1. Joe Namath. Broadway Joe, the man who guaranteed victory in Super Bowl III and delivered the greatest upset in sports history. The man who legitimized the AFL. The man who became a cultural icon and a media superstar. And, statistically, one of the worst quarterbacks in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Namath played 13 seasons from 1965 to 1977 with the Jets and the Rams. He threw 173 touchdowns and 220 interceptions. More interceptions than touchdowns. His career completion percentage was 50.1%, barely above 50. His career passer rating was 65.5. If a quarterback posted those numbers today, he would be benched. Namath only had 2 seasons in his entire career where he threw more touchdowns than interceptions. 2 out of 13. He never led the league in passer rating. He never led the league in completion percentage. He led the league in interceptions 4 times. 4! Joe Namath is in the Hall of Fame because of one game. Super Bowl III, January 12, 1969. The Jets beat the Baltimore Colts 16-7. Namath was named Super Bowl MVP despite not throwing a single touchdown pass in the game. The Jets won because of their defense and their running game. But Namath guaranteed the victory, and the media ate it up. Broadway Joe became a superstar. Not because of his play, because of his personality, because of his charisma, because he played in New York and the media loved him. And when the Hall of Fame voters looked at his career, they saw the guarantee, they saw the cultural impact, they saw the star, and they ignored the stats. Joe Namath is the single most overrated Hall of Famer in NFL history, and it is not close. He is in Canton because he was famous, not because he was great. And that is the ultimate failure of the Hall of Fame voting process. 10 players, 10 busts in Canton, 10 careers that got elevated beyond what the numbers justify. Some of them were carried by all-time great teams. Some of them played so long that voters confused longevity with greatness. And some of them were just in the right place at the right time with the right media coverage. The Hall of Fame is supposed to be for the best players in history. But these 10 prove that sometimes the Hall of Fame is just for the most famous. Which player on this list do you think least deserves to be in Canton? Drop a comment. And if this video made you think differently about the Hall of Fame, subscribe. I will see you in the next one.